Charlamagne Tha God had some unkind words for DEI while he was guest hosting The Daily Show. Let's watch this clip.
Every one of you has sat through one of those diversity training sessions and thought, this is some bullshit. And it's not just you. Over 900 studies have shown that DEI programs don't make the workplace better for minorities. In fact, it can actually make things worse because of the backlash effect.
Charlamagne Tha God went on to liken DEI to DARE programs, remember those, and saying they don't work.
DEI training is like DARE for racism. And you all know how effective that was. I was sitting there going, oh shit, there's a ton of fun drugs I should try. I didn't even know about Molly. Thanks, Officer John. But the biggest failure of DEI is that the number of black people in power at big companies is basically the same as it was 5 years ago.
So I saw this clip going viral on X. I think he makes a lot of good points speaking to how these studies have shown that it actually doesn't work, that it's not leading to increased representation of minority people in the business world, and also voicing something that I've voiced before, which is that when the one time in my life where I went through one of these kinds of things at a large corporation, the minority people who had to sit through it seemed to hate it just as much as everyone else.
I think what's important to note here, I made this exact argument that Charlamagne Tha God is making yesterday, that the goal should be to actually make the experiences of diverse people in the workplace not an experience of prejudice, that it's not a kind of extra bonus to non-white men and straight white men in the workplace. It's an acknowledgement that there are inequities, that in terms of their actual treatment and opportunity because of their identity, and that it's a goal. The goal is to get rid of the prejudices that exist against people. And that these programs are not actually doing that, and they're largely HR programs that are intended to guard the company against any kind of lawsuit from employees who articulate frustration and actually sue over the fact that they have been discriminated against in the workplace. The company can then say, I've got these policies in place, I did everything that I could do. That being said, I don't think that we can have this conversation and make these kinds of, I think, substantive and good criticisms without pointing out what people like Christopher Rufo have said their goal is with respect to the term DEI. Much like he said explicitly with respect to critical race theory, his goal is to take these terms and make them sort of amorphous so that people can project whatever concern they have on this specific word. And so they no longer might say, not everybody, but some people who might no longer feel able to say something that is frankly more explicitly racist can now say they have a concern about DEI, and it kind of whitewashes the complaint. We saw this a little bit with the Elon Musk complaining about the existence of black pilots. There's no literature, there's no statistic, there's no study that shows that black pilots are any less safe than pilots of any other race, that they're involved in any more incidences of crashes or other kind of error than any other kind of race. Yet he posts a picture of a black pilot and says, is this DEI? Would you feel safe to fly on this plane? Or reacts to a post like that positively. And you can kind of accept that in the mainstream in the way you wouldn't be able to make an open statement about how I just don't like black pilots,
I think DEI, unlike critical race theory, actually refers to something that is a bit more tangible. I mean, critical race theory is an academic. Tangible. Well, it's an academic discipline. It's not. There wasn't actually a critical race theory program. It was a component of the. It was a component of the curriculum for law schools and graduate schools, and it made its way. The term appears in some of the training materials in diversity workshops. DEI, unlike that term, is an agenda and a program, and there are people who work in that field who do that kind of teaching and instructing in corporations and in schools and in other places. So I do think some conservatives have broadened the term beyond any recognition, but at least when you're talking about that, you're pointing to a more tangible thing that people have had to undergo, a lot of people, in their workplace and in their school.
When someone says, is this pilot DEI, or says that the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore fell down because of DEI, is that a reference to a diversity program at an institution?
Well, what they're referencing there is affirmative action, is race-based hiring. Which, well,
what part of a boat piloted, as I understand it, what was it? Where was the boat from? Spanish, right? Something like that. At what point is the boat piloted by non-black people running into a bridge
piloted
have
by
to do
non-black people? I don't think it has anything to do with anything.
Well, so how is that
well,
DEI?
Who was saying that? Who was saying that it was DEI?
It was
piloted?
a viral Twitter phenomenon that a video of Baltimore's mayor talking about the bridge falling and the fact of the bridge falling itself was characterized as a DEI problem.
Yeah, and people, including Christopher Rufo and Christina Pushaw, said you should not refer to the mayor as a DEI mayor. It's an elected position. He's literally chosen by the people. You can have other criticisms of the mayor if they're deserved, but it's not a DEI thing. Well, maybe you were out that day. Jessica and I discussed that on the show. I said that. In terms of the pilots, I mean, yeah, no, obviously it would be racist to say that like black pilots fly the planes or ships or whatever the vehicle is less well than anyone else. I think the criticism they're trying to make is that we shouldn't select pilots or basically people for any other profession or be more likely to hire them based on their race, right? Isn't that an uncontroversial
Right, so the
statement?
question is, if these programs are designed to try to
Get people hired because of their race?
No, to prevent people from not being hired because of their race, because that's
Right.
where we're coming from.
That's what we all believe. You should not be hired because of your race.
What program do you think? But people are discriminated against on the basis of their race. So what programs do you advocate?
They're discriminated in favor of because
No,
of their
they're
race.
discriminated against because of their race.
When they
so
have
and that's
hiring,
why DEI programs exist in the first place. So what kind of programs do you think should be implemented to prevent people from being discriminated against because of their race or other kinds of protected
I think we
status?
should eliminate affirmative action programs that give people preferential treatment in terms of hiring and college admissions based on race. That is discrimination against people of the race not being preferred in the application and should be eliminated and is being eliminated by court order in many schools. And like 70% of Americans agree, including Democrats, that
so there's many examples of this. Here's one study that just came up from Bowdoin College. Employers discriminate against job applicants with black-sounding names. The study indicates
they shouldn't do
it was
that.
published last year. In this study, this professor found that employers are less likely to call black job applicants with black-sounding names when presented with identical resumes. What kind of policy should be implemented? That's real
already
discrimination.
illegal to do that.
Right, but that's not a policy that's implemented to actually prevent this from happening, because obviously if I apply for a job, there's no way for me to know that the reason I didn't get it is because I have a black-sounding name.
Yeah, that should be illegal, and it is. So
right, but what policy should be in place to actually make sure that I'm not abstractly being discriminated against without there being any pushback? That is why these programs are in place.
There
so
are
if your belief,
civil rights groups that will sue on your behalf.
If your belief, Robby, there's no way for me to know what happened. And the people are not always doing it consciously. So if your belief is that black people and other people from groups that are discriminated against just have to live with the reality that they are not going to be as marketable in the job force, that they are going to have less income over their lives, that they're going to be discriminated in their housing applications and all of these things, and there's nothing that you can do about it, and that we just have to suck it up, that's an honest position to have. But we cannot talk about the existence of these programs without acknowledging that they're there because we live in a world where my parents were born into an apartheid country, had to go to segregated schools, and were not equal citizens in the United States of America. And that that reality doesn't disappear overnight.
Ended all those policies. And we should end those policies. And we should end policies that award preferential status and treatment to people based on race. That was the whole point of ending it. Again, the DEI policies themselves do not fix what you're talking about. Right? That's what the evidence shows.
Criticism.
They're not fixing that.
That's a legitimate criticism. But if you're making that criticism without having any desire to get at the root of the problem, which is that people from these marginalized groups are discriminated against in meaningful ways. If you just don't care about that and you're like, well, that's going to happen, but what can we do about it? Then I think your criticism of DEI is in bad faith. DEI is bad because it doesn't work, not because the reality that it's trying to address isn't a reality.
I didn't say the reality. I didn't say racism doesn't exist. I never said that. Of course, there are still racial harms that exist out there in the world. The question is what we're going to do about it. And we do have a comprehensive system of civil rights law that can bring lawsuits on behalf of you if you're treated racially unfairly in the workplace.
As a lawyer who actually clerked in a court and reviewed those cases, it is almost impossible to prove. And those cases go nowhere. It is impossible to prove that the reason that your resume was rejected was because your name was Briahna with an H in it. It's literally impossible to prove. How would I go about proving that?
you get a civil rights law firm to do this on your behalf. I mean, there's an entire industry, there's an entire legal
Robby,
category.
So I'm doing that with my time and my resources and energy. You're just cruising through the job market, and if you think that's an appropriate way for us to have designed our country, and that's what equality looks like, hey, that's a stance.
Equality looks like people getting disfavored status when they apply for jobs or admissions to college.
Who has a disfavored status?
Asian people when they apply to Harvard until recently.
The problem with that is that white people are being maintained.
The problem is white people.
No, the problem is that Harvard's trying to maintain a quota of white people and not have an all Asian cast like so many of the UC schools where they don't have those kind of quota systems. Black people, and we talked about this yesterday with Amber, Black Americans in particular represent like 2% of the entire Black American, the Black population at a school like Harvard. The problem is you have a 40% legacy class that has to have their places, and that and other kinds of trying to maintain a white racial majority that's reflective of the general population is excluding all of these Asian students, Asian American students.
Why is it so hard to say? People should not get preference based on their legacy status or their racial status.
Right, but is Christopher Rufo making that argument? He's not. There's a campaign.
It's not. He will get rid of. He supports getting rid of.
No, Christopher. What's so frustrating about this argument?
People on the left keep saying you guys are defending legacy status. Literally, no one is defending
What's so frustrating about this argument is that Christopher Rufo literally says what he's doing. He's not hiding the ball. He says, I want to take a term like CRT and now DEI and make them stand in for people's broad racial resentments. And you can either fall for that, or you can say, oh, I agree with the discrete concern about DEI, but what I'm going to be very clear about, and what frankly Charlamagne was clear about in that clip, is that the inequity, the lack of not just representation, but what the representation reflects about the inequities that are built into the system, whether it's the number of people who are represented in Fortune 500 companies, which I think is less important because I don't love those companies in the first place, or whether or not it is your ability to be hired because of what your name looks like, or get a house for your family based on what your name looks like, whether your housing value is necessarily automatically lowered because you were a Black person in the house, which is a true phenomenon. Real estate appraisers appraise your house as having less value if you are Black. And there was a recent New York Times story where a middle-class Black family, upper middle-class Black family, had white friends of theirs come and be in their house and took all of their pictures down so that the appraiser would give them a higher housing value. All of those things.
How can it be bad? I think that is bad, but how can you say it's bad for the hiring official or the grant maker to racially discriminate, but it is good and desirable to have a policy of racial discrimination against other groups?
What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to eliminate those policies.
Okay. It's not a policy that's causing people to be discriminated against in reality in the world. It's their racism.
It's racism as policy in elite hiring and education. That is policy.
I strongly recommend everybody read Nicole Hannah-Jones's new piece because she talks about how people were making this exact argument like 10 years after the Civil War, saying, hey, we shouldn't have a Freedmen's Bureau to help process slaves' integration into society, people for whom it was illegal to read, who had no schools, for whom it was illegal to stay in any kind of housing, et cetera, who had no land, who had no priors, who had nothing in the world. That program within 10 years of the Civil War was eliminated by racist, I think it's fair to say, because they said it was unfair for white people and put them at a strategic disadvantage to slaves.
We are going to eliminate programs that are racially discriminatory on their face as designed by the law. That is what the vast majority of Americans want to do, even in places such as California.
Good luck to everybody else out there.
More Rising right after this.